as a server, and you also need to have a not so big database.
Raise your hand
This would affect
if
the
you would like to learn in the next 35 minutes how to produce 2 high-impact journal articles.
So if you go to blood characterization, so
some people don't care.
Angioedema, if you want to add
in the next 35 minutes, I'm going to show you 3 different capabilities that you can use to publish lots of papers, but 2 of them I can prove are high-impact clinical journal articles, because one was published in BMJ last year, and the other one was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a few years back. So we're going to jump straight into characterization, and then I'm going to make sure that we're on time for this so that you'll get your next break. So, this is going to be, I think I had slides and I'm going to totally ditch them because we're just going to play in Atlas.
Venipuncture, I guess it means you're collecting blood by.
Let me just make sure for those in the back of the room, is Atlas big enough to read or should I make it a little bit bigger?
Relevant to angioedema or not, okay. So these will be things that you would want to look at. So it's showing high prevalence of these.
Is that good, Mark?
So does this make sense?
Okay.
Or does it not?
So
this would be some.
So Jan walked you through how to create a cohort definition. We actually created definitions for lisinopril, created definitions for acute myocardial infarction. You all created definitions for angioedema. I'm going to make the assertion right now that we've gone through an evaluation process, and we believe those cohort definitions are reliable by using our OHDSI best practice tools, just as we just did for myocardial infarction and angioedema. So the question is, Jan put up a nice slide that said to do any type of analysis, all you need for inputs are cohorts. So what he didn't say was that Atlas is going to make it really easy for you to perform some pretty cool analyses. And they're basically all represented on the left-hand side of the Atlas user interface. I'm going to specifically, in this next segment, talk to you about 3 of the features. There's a tab called Characterizations, a tab called Cohort Pathways, and a tab called Incidence Rates. And so I'm going to describe what these types of analyses are. I'm going to show you how we create the inputs and show you the outputs, and make sure that you have time so that you can actually explore yourself and create your own analyses. And I'll even make sure that you have a homework assignment you have to do before the end of this. So first, let me just try to describe these different features. So I've got a cohort now of new users of lisinopril with prior hypertension. So somebody tell me, what would be something you'd like to know about a cohort of new users of lisinopril? Remember, there's a drug for hypertension. They all are required hypertension. So what would you like to know about people who are new users of lisinopril?
How old they are.
Jan wants to know how old they are. Good. So one thing we might be interested in is the age distribution of new users of lisinopril. That sounds good. Probably in every clinical paper you've read, there's a table 1 that summarizes an age distribution. So it might be nice if you know how to create that table 1 if you're going to write a high-impact clinical journal. What else would you like to know besides age?
What comorbidities I have? Diabetes, heart failure.
Comorbidities. So we want to know what is the prevalence of conditions such as diabetes and heart failure in the lisinopril cohort. Very good. Concomitant medications. We want to know, so there are people who take lisinopril. What drugs did they take before they got onto lisinopril? Very good. What else would you like to know?
Gender distribution.
Gender. So we want to know what percentage of these lisinopril new users are male and what percentage are female. Excellent. Anything else anybody can think of? Adherence can also be interesting. So you want to know, amongst the people who are taking lisinopril, do they stay on their lisinopril appropriately? Or maybe just how long do they take lisinopril for? Would be an interesting question to be able to explore. Absolutely. Anything else? Ethnicity. So we may, if the data source allowed for it, we might want to understand the demographics of the patients who are taking the drugs. In particular, in hypertension, there are specific issues, particularly on racial constructs associated with the use of hypertension drugs, and which ones may be more appropriate for those of African descent. And that's actually something that we would actively want to pay attention to. Okay, so everything that you just described would fall under this category called characterizations. And the basic idea of characterization is, given a cohort, I want to summarize characteristics about that cohort. I asked a very pointed question, which is, what do you want to know about lisinopril? But I'll add one extra wrinkle to it, which is that if we are thinking about a cohort like lisinopril, we may also want to be interested in understanding how does lisinopril compare to some other cohort. So you'll recall, as I started talking about this clinical question, we may want to compare lisinopril to another hypertension drug, such as hydrochlorothiazide, which is another new treatment. Because if we're going to ask the question, what is the age distribution, or what is the gender distribution, or what is the comorbidities, it may be interesting not only to know that number in an absolute effect, but also understand, is that actually different between two cohorts? And the characterization tool is going to allow us to do that. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly to set one of these up. If you go to the Characterization tab, I just clicked on New Characterization. And the inputs for a characterization, OHDSI APAC, are actually quite straightforward. All you have to do is you import a cohort that you're interested in characterizing. By clicking on Import, you can actually select the cohort that you fancy yourself to do. In our case, I'm going to select lisinopril. So you guys all made lisinopril cohorts, good for you. I'm going to select that one that we selected that we have there. And here I've selected one cohort, which is new users of lisinopril. But I could also add other cohorts. For example, I could select two. I'm going to select the comparator cohort of hydrochlorothiazide as well. Now that I've selected my cohorts, I can select what features do I want to characterize about the population. So for example, several of you mentioned various demographics. So we could say, I'm interested in, we mentioned race and ethnicity, we mentioned gender, we mentioned how long are you actually in the cohort for, so time in the cohort. We also wanted age groups. So simply by selecting these features, I am basically adding them to my summarization. Nicole asked for comorbid conditions, so I can simply select conditions. And we can also even, in this tool, can actually define when is the period of time that I want to look for those conditions. So I might say, I'm going to look for conditions any time in their medical history. And let's see, Mui asked for concomitant drug use, so we can look for drugs that overlap our index data. Now, there's a wide range of selections. I'm going through it quickly, but the idea here is that once you've created your cohorts, you can select your features in your analysis, and then all you have to do to perform the analysis is just generate it. And that'll probably just take a couple minutes. What I'll do while that's running is I'm actually going to open up one that I ran ahead of time, just to show you what the results look like. When I look at the results, I'm going to select both my lisinopril and my hydrochlorothiazide cohort. And what we can see is a table that shows you all of the covariates, but I'm going to skip over that one and go down to just, let's see, drugs are fun. I'll start with conditions, because that's probably the most fun. Actually, there we go, that's a nice one. Because Nicole asked about this, she said, well, what about diabetes? So what we are able to now observe directly is that in this database, new users of lisinopril with prior hypertension, first-line therapy, 20% of these patients had a code of diabetes or one of its descendants. And to contextualize whether 20% is high or low, we can look at the rate of diabetes in the hydrochlorothiazide cohort and see it's only 6.5%. So we can actually observe a difference, say that there is a difference in the baseline prevalence of diabetes amongst those that take lisinopril versus those that take hydrochlorothiazide. And not only can we search and explore this table of all the possible conditions, but we can actually also look at any systematic differences that observe graphically. And this is quite helpful because if we wanted to understand, I'll go down to age here, we may just want to understand at a very broad strokes what is the age distribution, which we can see here that in this database, it looks like the majority of the new users of lisinopril are in their 50s to 60s. But we can also try to actually make comparative, an understanding of comparisons between cohorts. So, in pretty much every single paper that you're going to read in pretty much any database study, you're going to get some sort of table 1, which is summarizing baseline characteristics. So if you want to write a high-profile, high-impact journal article, you're probably going to need to create a table 1, and the characterization tool is here to help you with doing that process. That's one quick analysis, and then I'm going to show you all 3, and then you're going to get to do at least pick one that you want to do yourself. The second one that I want to highlight is cohort pathways. Cohort pathways is something that we originally did many years ago, I guess, but this is work that was published. George Ripsack was the lead author, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, where we were able to explore the differences in the sequence of treatments that patients took for a range of different diseases. And we've now codified that in Atlas as this cohort pathway tool. So you can simply click New Cohort Pathway, make obviously that here as an example. And the only inputs you need for a cohort pathway is you need to define what is your target cohort, that is the population that you want to start with, which in our case would probably be all the people with hypertension. So we would identify a cohort of people with hypertension that we want to explore. And then, after we've selected our target cohorts, one or more target cohorts, we then need to define all of our event cohorts. So if we're interested in all the people who have treatment for hypertension, that means our event cohorts are going to be all the treatments for hypertension. And there's a wide range of different classes, as Mark's paper highlights for us. So for example, we may say, well, what's the interest in thiazide diuretics, or ARBs, or ACEs, or alpha blockers, or various diuretics, or beta blockers. And by creating these cohorts that already exist, we can just select them in the tool. We then specify various analysis settings about basically how are we going to create the sequence of treatments that we want, which I'm going to just leave as default. But there, in 60 seconds or less, I've just created an analysis, and all I'd have to do to run it is click Generate. So that was a whirlwind tour. That's because it really is that easy to design an analysis. And if you wanted proof of what something would look like, I'm going to just show you one that's already been executed. This is a pretty awesome picture. So I'm going to take a minute to explain it. What you're looking at here is a sunburst plot. This first circle in the middle represents the first line treatment for patients with hypertension. If I hover over any of these colors, you'll be able to see exactly what it is. You can see the most common first line treatment in this database is ACE inhibitors, just like lisinopril that we're studying. The next most common treatment is angiotensin receptor blockers, or ARBs. The next most common treatment, calcium channel blockers. The next most common is actually combination therapy, an ACE inhibitor combined with a thiazide diuretic. The next most common is a thiazide diuretic alone. Now, that's first line treatment. If we go to the second rung of the plot, we can basically see how a patient progresses. So amongst people that start on an ACE inhibitor, we we can see that many of them basically stay on an ACE inhibitor. That's the only drug they take, and they continue forward on ACE inhibitors as, to Whitney's point out, being persistent on one drug, they didn't switch or have to do anything. Some people, though, started on an ACE inhibitor and then had to add a thiazide diuretic. That is, their blood pressure wasn't adequately managed with one drug alone, so they added a second one. Some patients switched from an ACE inhibitor to an ARB. Some patients added other treatments. Each one of these circles represents a time where a person had to make another treatment choice. So when you see these long, skinny lines, these represent patients who, over the course of multiple years, had to take many different hypertension drug regimens to be able to manage their disease. And what should be impressive about this picture is you've seen a wide array of lots of different treatments. And indeed, one of the most profound findings of our initial study was just how much patient-level heterogeneity exists in the management of disease. Now, Mark's paper highlighted that we did the comparative effectiveness and safety of these first-line treatments, just this first circle in the middle. And what we found was that even though this drug, lisinopril, or ACE inhibitors, is the most common treatment, we found that this drug has the same effectiveness as this drug, but has more side effects. And same as this drug. And so we can imagine that if we observe in the real world that the majority of patients are getting suboptimal care, well, that's something that we can actually make a profound difference about. What I just showed you was all you had to do to run one of these analyses was pick the disease you're interested in, pick the treatments for the disease, produce the plot. There's at least a dozen publications in the literature using the OHDSI tools for cohort pathways that literally are just saying, here's the treatment's trajectory of a particular disease. So if anybody's interested in publishing a clinical journal article, this is a very nice, clean way to do a characterization analysis to do it. And can be quite informative because it tells us which treatments we might actually want to perform estimation and prediction studies on. All right. Last but not least, incidence rates. So an incidence rate, one of the questions that when I said, what do you want to know about lisinopril, what I was surprised that I didn't hear from you all was how often does angioedema happen amongst new users of lisinopril? Because I told you that it's a bad side effect that happens. And maybe the difference, if I told you it happens a lot, maybe that would deter you from its use, whereas if it happens extremely rarely, then maybe you wouldn't care so much. So how do you do an incidence analysis? Well, in the incidence rate tab, you can click New Analysis, and much like everything we've been doing thus far, all we have to do is pick our cohorts. So we can select our target cohort, which is going to be lisinopril. Okay. And then we can pick our outcome. And let's call it angioedema, I guess. Maybe you guys do something different. And so I just select angioedema. So now I've selected one target cohort and one outcome cohort. I've selected lisinopril, I've selected angioedema. I now need to define the time at risk. If I'm saying that I'm going to look for angioedema, we need to know when does the angioedema have to happen relative to exposure. Here I'm going to say that I will count events that happen starting the day after I take my first pill. And I'll keep counting those events until I stop taking lisinopril. So basically, while I'm on the drug, that's going to be my time at risk. And we're just going to count up how many events we observe. All I've got to do is click Generate. And actually, I'll just leave it on the screen for a second. So, this is going to pop up in probably just a couple minutes. One of our most impactful papers that was published just this last year is a paper published in the BMJ, whereby we characterized the incidence of a wide array of different adverse events that were associated, that are being monitored as potential risks associated with the COVID-19 vaccines. Turned out that at the start of the pandemic, as the vaccines were being rolled out, there's a collection of adverse events that are generally known to be associated with vaccines. Anaphylaxis being an example of one where we generally know that if you stick a needle in someone's arm, that some people are going to have an allergic reaction. And there's actually a collection of vaccine-related adverse events that we would want to be able to monitor on a regular basis. But it turns out that we don't have a good understanding of how often those adverse events just happen in the background around the world. And it turned out with the COVID-19 vaccines that not only did we have to monitor the specific adverse events that are commonly associated with most vaccines, but we had a new collection of adverse events that we were worried about. Specifically, concerns associated with blood clots, such as deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolisms, concerns about thrombocytopenia. And these were things that hadn't been previously attributed to vaccinations, and so therefore required new evidence. The European Medicines Agency had to make specific decisions associated with whether or not to allow the continuation of the emergency use of the AstraZeneca/Oxford vaccine when some initial adverse events were being observed associated with blood clots. And the EMA turned to us in OHDSI to try to produce background rates to help them understand how often do events such as deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism happen across the general population. And it turns out that the real question that they were asking was how much background rates of these events occur, in which age groups, in which sexes, and whether or not using different databases may give different answers. Because our colleagues at the EMA had access to a limited set of databases, but they were concerned that the evidence that they were using might not be the most up-to-date or generalizable for their needs. And so they reached out to us and asked for us to produce large-scale incidence rates for them to help make their decisions. And in fact, they even cited our evidence that we delivered to them as being impactful for them to ultimately decide about the benefits outweighing the risks associated with the various COVID-19 vaccines. So in terms of impact, and as you will hear from George tomorrow, we're very proud of the fact that we could generate reliable evidence with good phenotypes that could provide a good understanding of the background rate to make a difference to hundreds of millions of lives across Europe. But also, in part because of our collaboration with the EMA, we're able to take that work and get it published in BMJ and other journal articles in terms of our academic scholarship to demonstrate how this can be done. And at the time that I just was telling that story, this analysis actually ran. You can see that in the Pharmatrics database, we have 88,000 new users of lisinopril, of which 264 events of angioedema. That corresponds to an incidence proportion of 2.98 per thousand persons and an incidence rate of 3.9 per thousand person years. Now, this is the type of analysis that if you don't have standard phenotypes, if you don't have standard analytics, could be quite challenging actually to produce a credible answer. And here, while talking to you and clicking on a few buttons, we're able to actually generate a credible answer. So I did deliberately go through that very fast because I want you all now to have the experience of trying your own characterization analyses. So I encourage you to get back into the Atlas environment. Hopefully you still have it open, but I'll pull up that URL as well. And I encourage you to explore and play in any of these different capacities. Just to give you a specific homework so that you could try it, I just did lisinopril as the exposure for the event of angioedema. I also told you that lisinopril is used to prevent myocardial infarctions. So a question that you could go explore is, how often do we observe heart attacks following exposure to lisinopril? Or if you're interested, you can think about how you would add another cohort like hydrochlorothiazide to this analysis. Or one feature I didn't show you, but you may want to be interested in exploring, I'll go down here, is that there is the ability to create stratification criteria in the analysis. That is to say that we've just summarized the new users of lisinopril overall, but you may be interested in trying to produce an incidence rate within some specific subpopulation, such as by age or sex or diabetes or whatever characteristic it may be. So I encourage you to play with the tool and to do that. We have 20 minutes, right? Yeah. Yeah, so good. So I want you guys to take the next 20 minutes to play, to explore. I think after this section, we're going to go on to teach you about estimation, where you will get to use Atlas to design an estimation, and prediction, where you'll see part of the design. But in terms of the capabilities that are at your fingertips right now, the ability to design and execute characterizations, pathways, and incidence rates in this tool is something that is a good opportunity for you to explore and learn. So please take the next 20 minutes to play, and we've got several folks around to help you answer any questions you have, and certainly raise your hand or ask any questions as we go on. Is the task clear? All right, go play. All one of you decided to take a break.
This guy is.
Activity over here.
So can anybody share an insight that you learned in designing and running analysis? All right, let me start with the more basic thing. Who ran an incidence analysis? Raise your hand if you ran an incidence analysis. Did anybody run an incidence analysis? Nobody ran an incidence analysis. Okay, so let me try something else. How many people, after seeing this, believe it is possible to run an incidence analysis relatively easily? Raise your hand.
There you go. Come on, raise your hand. Yay!
Okay, for those of you who are not raising your hand, tell me why you think it would be difficult. And there are totally legitimate reasons why it could be difficult. So tell me what you see as the barrier or the challenge to doing an incidence analysis. Anyone?
Ask me the different way. How many people understood what Patrick did?
Did anybody understand what I was doing? Raise your hand if you understood what I was doing.
Did you guys understand what Patrick did? Some people did, some people, yes? You guys not. Did you like what Patrick did? Yes? Yes?
No hands raised.
Yes? You gotta ask it very differently.
So what I want to leave you with for the characterization is two main points that I want you to think about. Number one, if you want to publish a high-profile clinical journal article, it is possible to do it by performing characterization analyses. We have published important work using cohort pathways. That has had a pretty substantial impact. And we have also published papers doing incidence rates. You'll actually hear George Ripsack talk a little bit about it tomorrow. We think one of the biggest opportunities for the OHDSI community is to do large-scale incidence analysis, because when patients take drugs, they are often given the product label that lists a large set of potential side effects, and yet are never told how often those side effects actually happen. And that is nothing more than an incidence analysis. And so we believe there's a great opportunity for us to make a profound impact by doing a characterization analysis.
Let me ask another question. How many in here would like to spend more time being able to do what Patrick did? There.
There we go. That's better.
I got you more responses.
So I want you to know that doing characterization analyses can be impactful. The second thing I want you to understand is that there is a wide collection of tools available in the OHDSI community, including an atlas, whereby you can design and execute analyses very efficiently. While there are indeed longer tutorials to go through all the pieces that I showed you, it is also very much true that you can design and execute studies in a matter of minutes using the OHDSI tools. And it's that exact evidence coming out of the OHDSI tools that you would put into your publications. And this isn't just something that I stand up here and do tutorials about. My day job at Johnson & Johnson, I am asked questions about our medical products, and I perform these exact same analyses to provide insights to our teams on a pretty much daily basis. And so you have an opportunity, if you can learn these tools, to make a direct and immediate contribution to whoever you are collaborating with, including if you are trying to publish papers yourself.
So, trying to plan this for next year, right? Because APAC, we want to be able to spread the love of OHDSI and get more people to understand the OHDSI tool. So I'm going to ask one last question of this group for the next 5 minutes, and I'll ask more later after questions, okay? Is if we had a more in-depth version of these, the tutorials, like the stuff that he just talked about, next year, would you sign up for it? Raise hand, please. Ooh, cool, thank you. We will look at something else. Thank you.
All right, so I know many...
And the next symposium will probably be in Australia, so you want to
Go to Sydney and don't leave till you come out with a paper.
We could do it virtually. We could do the next tutorial virtually too.
All right, so we have, I know many of you did take a break, but we're not formally going to take our break. We've got 8 minutes, and when we come back, Martine and Mark, with I think some assist from Nicole, are going to teach you how to design and execute estimation studies. All right, so we'll be back in 8 minutes at 3:30.